Looking at my father's casket being lowered into the ground, I never imagined that in just 3 days, my own family would lock me out of my childhood home with all my belongings trapped inside. The funeral flowers were still wilting on his grave when my stepmother Linda handed me a cardboard box and told me I had 1 hour to pack my essentials before the locks were changed. But let me back up. For 15 years, I'd been the family's silent savior. While everyone else lived their dreams, I worked 3 jobs to keep our world from falling apart. When Linda was diagnosed with diabetes and couldn't afford her insulin, guess who maxed out credit cards to cover her medical bills? When my brother David's third startup crashed and burned, leaving him drowning in debt, who co-signed the loan that saved his house? When my sister Jessica got into her dream college but couldn't afford tuition, who worked double shifts at the diner and cleaned offices at night to make her education possible? Me. Always me. Sarah Mitchell, the dependable daughter who never complained, never asked for anything in return, and somehow convinced herself that this was what love looked like. Dad knew. He saw everything from his recliner in the living room, watching me come home exhausted at midnight, watching me skip meals so there'd be enough food for everyone else, watching me postpone my own dreams year after year while I funded theirs. He'd pat my hand sometimes and say, "You're the strongest one, Sarah. They don't see it now, but they will." I thought he meant they'd eventually appreciate my sacrifices. I had no idea he meant something else entirely. The first crack in my perfect family illusion appeared during Dad's final week in the hospital. I was there every day, of course, holding his hand while Linda, David, and Jessica took turns visiting when it was convenient for their schedules. But I started noticing things. Whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Meaningful glances exchanged over Dad's unconscious form. The way they suddenly became very interested in Dad's filing cabinet and the location of important documents. "Where does Dad keep his will?" Linda asked me on Tuesday, her voice casual but her eyes sharp. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "With his lawyer, I assume." "Has he ever mentioned updating it recently?" Something cold settled in my stomach. "Why would you ask that?" "Oh, just making sure everything's in order. You know how men are about these things." I didn't know. Dad had always been meticulous about paperwork. But the question planted a seed of unease that would soon grow into something much darker. When Dad passed on Thursday morning, I was the only one holding his hand. The others were on their way, but stuck in traffic, delayed by work, caught up in something more important than being present for his final breath. I sat with his body for 2 hours, whispering apologies for all the times I couldn't protect him from their selfishness, promising him I'd keep the family together like he'd always wanted. I should have known that keeping us together was the last thing they had in mind. The funeral was beautiful, exactly what Dad would have wanted. Simple, dignified, full of stories about his kindness and generosity. Linda played the grieving widow perfectly, accepting condolences with just the right amount of composed sorrow. David gave a eulogy about Dad's business wisdom and strong work ethic. Jessica shared memories of his terrible dad jokes and weekend fishing trips. I organized everything, of course. Chose the flowers, wrote the obituary, coordinated with the funeral home, arranged the catering for afterward. While they grieved publicly, I handled the details privately, just like always. Several family friends pulled me aside to comment on how well I was holding everything together, how proud Dad would be of my strength. If only they knew what was coming. The first real warning sign came at the post-funeral gathering. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up like always, when I overheard Linda talking to her sister in the hallway. "Well, at least now we can get back to normal," Linda said, her voice tired but relieved. "What do you mean?" her sister asked. "I mean we won't have to pretend anymore. Robert's gone, God rest his soul, but now we can make some changes around here, starting with getting some space." My hands stilled on the dish I was washing. Space from what? "Sarah's been living here for 15 years, Linda continued. "It's time she got her own place. David's thinking about moving back in with the kids, and Jessica will need somewhere to stay when she graduates. This house was always meant for family." The dish slipped from my numb fingers and shattered in the sink. I stared at the broken pieces, each shard reflecting the harsh kitchen light like tiny mirrors of my suddenly fractured reality. I was family, wasn't I? That night, after everyone left and the house felt too quiet without Dad's presence, Linda sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd done homework as a kid, where I'd planned budgets to cover everyone's expenses, where I'd eaten countless dinners alone because I worked late shifts to keep us afloat. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk." The endearment felt wrong coming from her lips. She'd never called me honey before. "I know this is hard timing, but we need to discuss some changes. With Robert gone, this house feels different, you know? David's been struggling since his divorce, and he thinks moving back home might help him get back on his feet. And Jessica's going to need a place to stay after graduation while she looks for a job." I felt something hollow opening in my chest. "This is my home too, Linda." "Of course it is, sweetie, but you're 35 years old. Don't you think it's time you had your own space? Your own life? Robert always worried that you were sacrificing too much for us." The irony was suffocating. Dad worried I was sacrificing too much, so his wife's solution was to sacrifice me completely. "I've been helping with the mortgage for 10 years, I said quietly. "The house is half in Dad's name, half in mine." Linda's expression flickered. "Well, yes, but that was just for tax purposes. Robert explained it to me. You were never actually supposed to be an owner." That was a lie. I had the paperwork upstairs in my room. Dad had insisted on adding my name to the deed after I'd nearly bankrupted myself saving the house from foreclosure when Linda's medical bills got out of control. He'd said it was only fair since I was the one making sure we didn't lose it. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. "You're a smart, capable woman. You'll figure it out. Besides, this will be good for you. Force you to finally live your own life instead of taking care of everyone else." She made it sound like a favor, like kicking me out of my childhood home was some kind of intervention for my own good. "Can I have some time to find a place?" "Of course. Take a week or two. We're not monsters, Sarah." 2 days. They gave me 2 days. I came home from Dad's lawyer's office on Saturday afternoon to find the locks changed and my belongings in garbage bags on the front porch. My clothes, my books, my laptop, 15 years of accumulated life, all stuffed into black plastic like trash waiting for pickup. David was loading his truck in the driveway, not even bothering to look ashamed when he saw me standing there with my key in my hand, staring at a door that no longer recognized me. "Oh, hey, Sarah. We decided to move the timeline up a bit. Linda found a great deal on new locks, and the locksmith had an opening today. You know how these things are. You've got to jump when the opportunity presents itself." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. 15 years of sacrifice, and they were talking about changing my locks like they were discussing the weather. "My things!" We packed everything we could find. "If we missed anything, just let us know and we'll get it to you." "David, I have nowhere to go." For just a moment, his facade slipped, and I saw something that might have been guilt cross his features, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "There's a Holiday Inn on Route 9. They have weekly rates." That night, sitting in a sterile hotel room that smelled like industrial cleaning products and other people's disappointments, I finally understood what Dad had meant about them not seeing my strength until later. He hadn't meant they'd appreciate me eventually. He'd meant they'd need my strength when they realized what they'd lost, but I was too broken to feel strong. I was too angry to feel anything but the urge to disappear entirely. Over the next 2 weeks, they made it clear that I was no longer part of their universe. My phone number was blocked from the family group chat. When I tried calling David's house phone, Jessica picked up and told me he wasn't available, her voice cold and formal like I was a telemarketer. Linda changed her Facebook privacy settings so I couldn't see family updates or photos. The worst part was the gaslighting that continued even in my exile. When I finally managed to corner Linda at the grocery store, she acted like my hurt feelings were completely unreasonable. "We gave you a place to stay for 15 years, Sarah. Most parents would have charged rent. We never asked you for a penny." "I paid half the mortgage," I reminded her, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "That was your choice. Nobody forced you to do that." "You would have lost the house without me." "That's dramatic. We would have figured something out. They had rewritten history so completely that my contributions had been erased entirely. In their version of events, I was a freeloader who had overstayed her welcome, not the person who had kept their world from falling apart for 15 years. I started seeing my things for sale on Facebook Marketplace 3 weeks after they locked me out. My books, my furniture, my grandmother's quilt that Dad had saved for me when she died. The descriptions were casual, matter of fact. Moving sale. Everything must go. Like they were selling off the belongings of a stranger. When I messaged Linda about the quilt, she read my message but never responded. When I tried calling, she'd changed her number. When I showed up at the house, they pretended not to be home even though I could see David's truck in the driveway. I was being systematically erased from my own family's history. The final betrayal came when I discovered they'd drained the joint savings account I'd shared with Dad. $10,000 I'd saved from working overtime shifts. Money I'd planned to use for a down payment on a small condo when I was ready to move out on my own terms. Gone. Transferred out the day after the funeral. When I called the bank, they explained that Linda, as Dad's wife and the executor of his estate, had legal access to any joint accounts pending the reading of the will. The money was gone, and there was nothing I could do about it until the estate was settled. "When is the will reading scheduled?" I asked the customer service representative. "I don't have that information, ma'am. You'd need to contact the estate attorney." I did. 3 times. Each time, I was told the reading had been postponed due to complications with the estate. When I pressed for details, I was told I wasn't authorized to receive that information since I wasn't listed as a primary beneficiary. That's when the terrible truth began to crystallize. They weren't just pushing me out of the house. They were pushing me out of the will. Somehow, they'd convinced themselves that Dad had left everything to Linda, with portions for David and Jessica, and nothing for the daughter who had sacrificed everything to keep them afloat. I started having panic attacks in the hotel room, gasping for air in the middle of the night, surrounded by garbage bags full of my dismantled life, wondering how 15 years of love and sacrifice had led to this complete abandonment. I'd lost my family, my home, my savings, and my sense of who I was all in the span of a month. The worst part was the doubt that crept in during the darkest hours. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had been a burden. Maybe my help hadn't been as essential as I'd thought. Maybe I'd convinced myself I was the family savior when really I was just the family doormat, and they'd finally gotten tired of wiping their feet on me. I stopped eating regularly, stopped answering calls from concerned friends who'd heard about Dad's death and wanted to check on me. Stopped looking for apartments because what was the point when I had no money for a deposit and no family to co-sign a lease? One night, sitting in my car outside the house where I'd grown up, watching the warm light spill from windows that no longer welcomed me, I hit the lowest point of my entire life. I had nothing, no family, no home, no money, no future. Just a hotel room paid for with a maxed-out credit card and the growing certainty that I'd somehow deserved all of this pain. I was so lost in my spiral of self-hatred that I almost missed the call that would change everything. "Miss Mitchell, this is James Harrison from Harrison & Associates. I was your father's attorney. I sincerely apologize for the delay, but we're finally ready to proceed with the reading of your father's will. Can you come in tomorrow at 2 o'clock? My heart stopped. I can come in. But I thought, Linda told me I wasn't a primary beneficiary. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Mr. Harrison spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "Mrs. Mitchell may have been misinformed about the contents of your father's will. I think you'll find tomorrow's meeting very illuminating. Please bring identification and plan to stay for at least an hour. There's quite a bit to discuss." As I hung up the phone, something stirred in the hollow space where my heart used to be. Not hope, exactly, but curiosity. Dad had always been full of surprises. Maybe he had one more left in him. I had no idea that this final surprise would be big enough to destroy the family that had destroyed me. The morning of the will reading, I sat in my hotel room staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to decide who I was supposed to be. For a month, I'd been nobody. Cast out, forgotten, erased from my own family's story. But something had shifted with that phone call from Dad's lawyer. Not hope, exactly, but a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, I still mattered. I chose my clothes carefully. The navy dress Dad had complimented me on last Christmas, the one that made me look professional and put together even when I felt like I was falling apart. If this was going to be my final appearance in my family's story, I wanted to look like someone who deserved to be there. The law office of Harrison and Associates occupied the third floor of a downtown building I'd driven past 1,000 times but never entered. The waiting room was all mahogany and leather, the kind of place that whispered old money and serious business. I gave my name to the receptionist and tried to ignore the way my hands were shaking. They were already there when I arrived. Linda, David, and Jessica sat clustered together on one side of the conference room like they were preparing for battle. Linda wore her funeral black again, playing the grieving widow, even though Dad had been gone over a month. David had put on his one good suit, the one I'd helped him buy for job interviews 3 years ago. Jessica looked uncomfortable in business attire, fidgeting with her phone and avoiding eye contact with everyone. The sight of them sitting there, united in their certainty that they belonged while I didn't, sent a familiar spike of pain through my chest. But underneath the hurt was something new. Anger. Clean, bright anger that burned away the fog of self-doubt I'd been drowning in for weeks. "Sarah!" Linda's voice was artificially warm, like we were old friends running into each other at the grocery store instead of family members who'd systematically destroyed each other. "We weren't sure you'd gotten the message. How are you doing, honey?" The endearment made my skin crawl. She'd never called me honey when I was paying her medical bills. "I'm managing," I replied, taking a seat on the opposite side of the table. The distance felt intentional, symbolic. Us versus me. The family versus the outsider. Mr. Harrison entered with a thick manila folder and the kind of serious expression that meant business. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with graying temples and the sort of careful demeanor that came from delivering life-changing news to families who weren't prepared to hear it. "Thank you all for coming. I know this has been a difficult time, and I apologize for the delays in scheduling this meeting. There were some complications with the estate that required additional documentation." He opened the folder and pulled out several documents, arranging them carefully on the table like he was setting up pieces for a chess game. "Before we begin, I want to make sure everyone understands that Robert Mitchell's will was updated just 6 months ago. He came to me specifically to make changes after what he described as finally seeing clearly about his family situation." Something cold settled in my stomach. 6 months ago was when I'd found out about the drained joint account they'd hidden from me. When I'd discovered David was gambling again despite my co-signing his business loan. When Jessica had asked me to cover her rent for the 3rd consecutive month while she focused on her art instead of her part-time job. Linda shifted uncomfortably. "Robert didn't mention updating his will to me." "He specifically asked that these changes remain confidential until after his death," Mr. Harrison replied smoothly. "He said he wanted to observe how his family behaved when they thought no one was watching." The room went very quiet. I could hear Jessica's rapid breathing, David clearing his throat nervously, Linda's rings clicking against the conference table as she fidgeted with her hands. "Let's begin with the house," Mr. Harrison continued, pulling out a property deed. "The family home at 247 Oak Street. Robert's will designates Sarah Mitchell as the sole owner of this property, effective immediately." The words hit the room like a bomb going off in slow motion. Linda's face went white. David's mouth fell open. Jessica looked like she might throw up. "That's impossible," Linda said, her voice sharp with panic. "The house is mine. I'm his wife. Community property laws." "Mrs. Mitchell, the house was purchased before your marriage to Robert and was never converted to joint ownership. Additionally, Sarah's name was added to the deed 10 years ago when she provided funds to prevent foreclosure. Robert's will merely transfers his remaining 50% ownership to her, making her the full owner." I stared at the deed in his hands, trying to process what I was hearing. The house. My childhood home. The place they'd locked me out of with garbage bags on the porch. It was mine. "There has to be a mistake," David said, his voice cracking slightly. "Dad would never, I mean, I'm the son. The house should go to the son." Mr. Harrison's expression remained neutral. "I can assure you there's no mistake. Robert was very specific about his reasoning. He left detailed instructions." He pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's familiar handwriting. "This is for you, Sarah. Your father asked that it be read aloud in front of the family." My hands were trembling as I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. Dad's words, written in the careful script I remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists, swam before my eyes. I had to clear my throat twice before I could speak. "My dearest Sarah," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've discovered what I've suspected for years, that some people only show their true nature when they think no one is watching." I looked up to see Linda's face flushed with anger, David staring at his hands, Jessica crying silently. "For 15 years, I watched you sacrifice your own dreams to keep our family afloat. I watched you work yourself to exhaustion to pay for Linda's medical bills, to save David from his own poor choices, to fund Jessica's education and lifestyle. I watched you give everything of yourself and ask for nothing in return except to be loved and appreciated." My voice broke on the word appreciated, but I forced myself to continue. "I also watched them take your generosity for granted. I saw how they spent money carelessly because they knew you would cover the bills. I heard how they talked about you when they thought I couldn't hear, like you were an employee instead of family, like your sacrifices were obligations instead of gifts." Linda made a sound like she was going to protest, but Mr. Harrison held up a hand to stop her. "Please let Sarah finish reading," he said firmly. "6 months ago, I made the decision to test them. I told Linda that I was considering updating my will to leave everything to charity, unless my children proved they truly valued family over money. I wanted to see if the prospect of losing their inheritance would make them treat you better." I remembered 6 months ago. That's when everything had gotten worse, not better. When the gaslighting had intensified, when they'd started freezing me out of family decisions, when they'd begun treating me more like hired help than family. Instead, they began planning how to force you out of the house so they could claim it entirely. They talked about having you declared mentally incompetent so they could control your finances. They discussed hiding the will reading from you altogether. The room was dead silent except for Jessica's quiet sobbing. David looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Linda's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. That's when I knew I had to act. "You are the only one who loved me unconditionally, who sacrificed for the family without expecting anything in return. You are the only one who deserves to inherit what I've built." I paused, overwhelmed by the weight of Dad's words and what they meant about the family I'd thought I knew. "The house is yours, Sarah. Not because you earned it through sacrifice, but because you're the only one who would use it to help others instead of yourself. The rest of my estate, my life insurance, my retirement accounts, my savings, will be divided as follows: 60% to you, 20% divided equally between David and Jessica, and 20% to Linda. I pray that someday they'll understand that love isn't something you take, it's something you give." I set the letter down with shaking hands. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds before the explosion began. "This is bullshit!" David slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. Dad was sick at the end. He wasn't thinking clearly. Sarah manipulated him. "I barely saw him the last few months," I said quietly. "I was working 3 jobs to pay for Linda's new medication regime, remember?" "You poisoned him against us," Linda accused, her voice shrill. "You fed him lies about our conversations." "I never discussed any of you with Dad," I replied. "I was too busy covering for you." Jessica finally found her voice. "Sarah, you can't actually keep all of this. We're family. We can work something out." "Like you worked something out when you locked me out of my own house?" The anger I'd been suppressing for weeks finally broke free. "Like you worked something out when you sold my grandmother's quilt on Facebook? Like you worked something out when you drained my savings account?" "We needed that money," Linda snapped. "There were funeral expenses." "I paid for the funeral," I said. "Every penny, while you were stealing my savings." "Mister, Harrison cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss the logistics of the property transfer. No! Linda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm contesting this will. Robert wasn't in his right mind. Sarah took advantage of an elderly man. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Harrison interrupted, his voice taking on a harder edge. I should mention that Robert anticipated this reaction. He had himself evaluated by 2 independent psychiatrists 6 months ago to confirm his mental competency. Both doctors declared him fully capable of making legal decisions. Additionally, he asked me to install security cameras in the house during his final months. The color drained from Linda's face. What? He recorded every conversation, every interaction, including the ones where you discussed hiding the will reading from Sarah and forging documents to claim full ownership of the house. The room went dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. That's illegal, David stammered. It's perfectly legal to record conversations in your own home in this state, Mr. Harrison replied calmly. And Robert was very thorough. He documented everything. Jessica was sobbing openly now. Sarah, please, I'm sorry. I was scared and I listened to Mom and David. I didn't want to hurt you. But you did hurt me, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. You threw away 15 years of sisterhood for a house you'd never even helped maintain. We can fix this, David said desperately. We'll move out of the house. You can have it back. We'll pay you back. With what money? I asked. You haven't held a steady job in 5 years, and Linda hasn't worked since she married Dad. Linda's mask finally slipped completely. You ungrateful little bitch! After everything we did for you, what did you do for me? I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in months. You gave me a place to live in exchange for bankrolling your entire life. That's not love, Linda. That's employment. And apparently, I'm fired. Sarah, Jessica pleaded, I know we messed up, but we're still family. No, I said firmly. Family doesn't lock each other out. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't try to erase each other from existence. I turned to Mr. Harrison. When can I take possession of the house? The property transfer can be completed this week. However, the current occupants will need 30 days' notice to vacate according to state law. They'll have it by tomorrow, I said. David was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Sarah, you can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go? I don't know, I replied. The same place you expected me to go, I suppose. You'll figure it out. You're smart, capable people. At least that's what Linda told me when she kicked me out. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork and hostile encounters. They hired a lawyer to contest the will, but Mr. Harrison's documentation was ironclad. The security footage showed exactly what Dad had suspected. A family plotting to systematically exclude and exploit their most generous member. Jessica was the first to break. She showed up at my hotel room 3 days after the will reading, crying and apologetic. I never wanted it to go this far, she sobbed. I was just scared about money after graduation. Mom and David made it sound like you were trying to steal our inheritance. I never asked for anything, I reminded her. I know that now. I've been watching the footage Dad recorded. God, Sarah, we were so horrible to you. How did we become such awful people? It was a good question. Looking at my sister, my former sister, I could see glimpses of the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd cried when I left for college, who'd once told me I was her favorite person in the whole world. I think it happens gradually, I said, one compromise at a time, one justification at a time, until you're so far from who you used to be that you don't even recognize yourself. Can you forgive me? She asked. I considered this. Maybe. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back to the way things were. What does it mean? It means you get therapy. Real therapy, not just saying you will. It means you get a job and support yourself instead of looking for someone else to bankroll your dreams. It means you figure out who you are when you're not taking advantage of someone who loves you. Jessica nodded through her tears. I'll do that. I promise. Good. And Jessica, if you actually do the work, The real work of becoming a decent person. Maybe we can have a relationship again someday. A real one, based on mutual respect, instead of me giving and you taking." David never apologized. Instead, he became increasingly desperate and vindictive as the 30-day deadline approached. He tried to sell fixtures from the house, claiming they were his personal property. He attempted to change the locks again, arguing that he was protecting the estate from theft. When that failed, he started a social media campaign portraying me as a greedy daughter who'd stolen her family's home. The campaign backfired spectacularly when several family friends shared their own stories about my years of sacrifice. Our neighbor, Mrs. Chin, posted a long comment about watching me work 3 jobs to keep the family afloat. Dad's brother shared memories of me caring for Dad during his illness while the rest of the family was too busy to visit. Within a week, the narrative had flipped. Instead of being seen as the villain, I was being recognized as someone who'd finally stood up for herself after years of being taken advantage of. The comments section became a support group for people who'd had similar experiences with toxic family members. Linda left town before the 30 days were up. She'd found an apartment across the state and moved out in the middle of the night, taking several pieces of furniture that didn't belong to her. I decided not to pursue it. Sometimes the cost of justice is higher than the price of peace. David held out until the last possible day, then hired a moving truck and disappeared without leaving a forwarding address. He took Dad's golf clubs and his toolkit, things I would have gladly given him if he'd asked instead of stolen. On the morning I moved back into my childhood home, I stood in the empty living room and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Silence. Not the lonely silence of abandonment, but the peaceful silence of finally being free. The house felt different without the toxic energy that had permeated it for so long. Bigger somehow, like it could finally breathe again. I walked through each room, remembering good times from before Linda and her children had moved in. Before I'd become the family's ATM. Before love had been confused with financial obligation. In Dad's bedroom, I found one last surprise. A small wooden box on his nightstand with another letter addressed to me. "Sarah," it read, "if you're reading this, it means you survived them. I'm proud of you for finally putting yourself first. Use this money to build the life you deserve, the one you never got to have because you were too busy building theirs." Inside the box was a key to a safety deposit box containing another $50,000 in cash. Money Dad had hidden away specifically for me. Money that couldn't be touched by his estate or claimed by anyone else. I sat on his bed and cried for the first time since his funeral. Not tears of grief or anger, but tears of relief. Dad had seen me. Really seen me. He'd known exactly what would happen after he died, and he'd protected me as much as he could. That afternoon, I called Jessica. "I'm starting a support group," I told her, "for people who've been financially or emotionally abused by family members. You can come if you want, but only if you're actually ready to do the work." "What kind of work?" she asked. "The hard kind. The kind where you look at who you've been and decide to become someone better. The kind where you learn the difference between love and manipulation. The kind where you figure out how to have healthy relationships instead of exploitative ones." There was a long pause. "Will you help me?" "I'll help you help yourself," I said. "But I won't do the work for you. I'm done carrying people who won't walk." 6 months later, the support group had grown to 15 regular members. We met every Thursday in my living room, the same living room where my family had plotted to exclude me, now transformed into a place of healing and empowerment. Jessica came sporadically at first, still expecting someone else to fix her problems. But gradually, she began to understand that healing was something she had to choose actively, every day. She got a job at a coffee shop, moved into her own apartment, started paying her own bills. She was learning to stand on her own feet for the first time in her adult life. David never contacted me again, but I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved in with Linda and they were struggling financially. Some people interpreted this as poetic justice, but I mostly felt sad for them. They'd chosen to remain trapped in their own toxicity instead of growing beyond it. I used Dad's gift money to go back to school and get my counseling degree. After 15 years of being an unpaid therapist to my dysfunctional family, I decided to become a professional one. I specialized in family trauma and financial abuse, helping other people recognize and escape the same patterns that had nearly destroyed me. The house became more than just my home. It became a sanctuary for people learning to rebuild their lives after family betrayal. I rented out the spare bedrooms to support group members who were transitioning to independence, creating the kind of chosen family I'd always craved but never had. On the first anniversary of Dad's death, I planted a garden in the backyard. Not for the family that had rejected me, but for the family I was building. Friends who showed up when I needed them, support group members who celebrated each other's victories, neighbors who became chosen siblings. As I knelt in the dirt, planting seeds that would bloom into something beautiful, I finally understood what Dad had meant about being strong. Strength wasn't about enduring abuse or sacrificing yourself for people who didn't appreciate it. Strength was about recognizing your own worth and building a life that reflected it. The woman who'd been locked out with her belongings in garbage bags was gone. In her place was someone who knew the difference between love and exploitation, someone who could set boundaries without guilt, someone who understood that the best revenge against people who treated you badly was to build a life so good they could never touch it. I was finally free, and for the first time in my adult life, I was home.